Welcome to Break Everything. Your host, Lisa L. Levy, will guide you through critical thought conversations and a journey of directed disruption that makes a difference. Experience bold conversations with industry leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo.
In every episode, I have conversations with disruptive leaders, people who are willing to think outside of the box, challenge the way we've always thought things, and encourage us to consider doing things differently tomorrow than we do today. I'm excited today to have a guest who lives and breathes all of those ideas at an exponentially greater level than I ever imagined. To achieve previously unattainable and unsustainable results, you must work with somebody who has done the unexpected, survived the unfathomable, and who dares to go places other coaches won't to get the results other coaches won't get. That person is Sally Anderson. She's the world's only documented visionary at the forefront of sustainable human and organizational transformation. With 3 decades in the leadership trenches, Sally's life experiences and research have laid the foundation for her world-class modality known as co-creative equanimous leadership. It's a meticulously planned, heavily tested, and experiential program. It's unlike anything you've probably ever considered before, and it is why I am so incredibly excited to have Sally with me today.
How privileged am I?
How privileged am I? Sally, I am so thrilled to have you here with us. So I just teed up the formal introduction of you, but it doesn't do any good without you sharing with us your story so that the audience understands just how impressive you are.
Oh, darling, sweetie. I've been really looking forward to engaging with you today, so thank you for the opportunity. So everybody has a story, and your story is your story, my story is my story. But I do believe that your story does not have to define who you are, but it is the backbone of your character and how you show up in the world. So I'll just prefix everything that I share there. For me to be able to work at the level that I do, obviously I had to go through a cross-section of experiences that enabled me to experience a level of consciousness that is different from most. And specifically now in post-COVID times, as much as there has been a viral pandemic, there is a fear pandemic on the planet. And specifically in leadership, which is where I specialize, most leaders are used to being in control and they don't know how to navigate uncertainty. So I was banging the tambourine 21 years ago, been 30 years in the leadership trenches, 21 years ago in equanimous leadership, co-creative leadership. And you can imagine that just landed like, hello, what planet are you on? Whereas now it's far more palatable because of the inability to know what is about to occur. And my concern is that mental health at any level within an organization has turned into a compliance dynamic because there's a lack of understanding of what the hell is this thing called mental health. They're now forcing me to have to deal with it. I've got to address it in my organization. So it's kind of like a tick box so that we can say that we've kind of like addressed that mental health dynamic, but nobody's focusing on mental health at the most senior level. And I've got some statistics at some stage today that I'd like to speak into for the linear listener that we have on the call, because there's some frightening statistics post-COVID on what is happening for the most senior executive. And yet it's all very well to rattle off statistics, but what are we going to do about it? Which is part of what I'd like to speak into today, because the system is broken. And I believe that I have a part to play in being able to transition leaders on where they are to, where they need to be. So where did that all come from? I'm very conscious of time that we have today, so I'm just going to kind of like Sally Anderson on speed go in. So I was born in New Zealand. I went to Canada when I was 2, came back when I was 6. So I've got a bit of a Kiwi Canadian twang. New Zealand's one of the most beautiful places on the planet, a bit biased. Father was a guidance counsellor in the schooling system, and we had street kids in our house since I can ever remember. So I've spent 20 years philanthropically outside of what I've done corporately, standing for eradicating teen suicide. The fact that we tolerate the teen statistics that we do is abhorrent. Our kids are dying, it's not okay. And yet we're so disassociated from the statistics can just be rattled off. And yet, okay, and what are we going to do about that? Don't even get me on that pedestal. So I got my first job hiring out skis. I learned to ski on Whistler Mountains. So obviously I wanted to be away from my parents and get my own pay packet and spend it on what I wanted to. So, you know, your audience listeners, if they cast their mind back to the first time they got their pay packet and what they wanted to spend their money on. So at 15, everybody in the early 80s used to hitchhike, and I hitchhiked into a local township with a girlfriend. Cut a very long story short. There was a notorious gang here in New Zealand, and I was abducted by that gang. We were a bit rebellious. We went into the public bar after we shopped, and I was 15, so I was underage. I looked older than what I was. We hung out with the locals, thinking it was all innocent. So I was taken to a local hangout, abducted by the particular mob, thrown onto a butcher's block like a sheep carcass, and was raped from every orifice by more than 100 gang members over a 12-hour period. Nobody survives an experience like that. I had to separate from my body completely to survive the experience, beaten black and blue, thrown into the back of a truck like a sheep carcass, taken to another location. Rapes continued on the drive there, and also when I arrived in that new location. Ironically, I was found by the head of that particular mob in that location, and I was delivered back to where I was staying. I was missing for about a day and a half. What do you say to your parents? Or my parents didn't know how to deal with it, even though my father was a guidance counsellor. So go back to school, act like it didn't happen. So no support, and there was no support for the victim back in the early 80s. So I didn't need to go and do a psych degree. I lived into becoming a course junkie over a 30-year period, name a book, a CD, a course. I read it, listened to it, went to it. But I struggled to sustain the change. I experienced body dysmorphia to the extreme, addictions to the extreme, the inner critic, vicious dialogue to the extreme, everything to the extreme, which was my apprenticeship. I can acknowledge that mob for being my spiritual initiators for what I do today. That had it not have been as severe that it was, because it wasn't just the incident, it was then, dragged in a good 20-year life sentence. But I wouldn't be able to do today and it's a profound gift to be able to stop people hurting permanently. I'm a coach intuitive, not formally trained in anything, which is probably why I get away with everything. Throw anything at me, any place, anytime, anywhere, on anything. Language is my vehicle, so dangerous woman to talk to. So I can facilitate forums, whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people, shifting people real time, regardless of what it is that they've experienced. Having led my own 3-day leadership retreats for 10 months of the year for 10 years, I saw a cross-section of dysfunction of people who are highly trained, but knowledge is redundant unless you apply it. So my passion specifically around mental health is at that most senior level, because Houston, we have a problem, it's not being addressed. And that is hugely concerning, because we will not be able to change new world problems from the same thinking that actually created it. And if we're not evolving the consciousness of those who lead, then we're in deep doo-doo, which we are currently. So that was my first defining moment. My second defining moment was in 2018, just for full disclosure. I was character assassinated by some of my most trusted people in my own business. I endured 9 months of living hell online, targeted attack, death threats, bankruptcy as a result of the targeted attack of "we're going to take you under." My husband had a triple bypass, 2 strokes, carotid artery operation to avert a 3rd stroke. So I'm trying to keep my husband alive. My father had died, my brother had died, my sister had died. She died of breast cancer. I get a breast cancer scare in the midst of being character assassinated, trying to keep my husband alive. I started questioning my faith, Lisa, and thinking that, does God, what more are you going to throw at me? It will make sense in a moment. And then in about 17 months ago, my husband died. And that has been one hell of a rite of passage. So in sharing all of this, I believe everything has been in perfection. I wouldn't have said it at the time. I think there's other ways to learn this, but I've you're never given anything you can't handle, is what I communicate. If those cards are dealt to you, then this is what you're here learning. Specifically around the death of my husband, it has been a rite of passage. It has been a masterclass in equanimity. Who I am as a person has changed. My entire philosophy has changed. My view on the world has changed. But I do believe that it has elevated me to a new level of consciousness, and that I'm ready to now play a part in, as an example, systemic change with some of the most dysfunctional things that are occurring on the planet. The fact that I have a skill on being able to shift anybody out of anything, regardless of how long it has been running. I have my own opinion about depression. I have my own opinion about PTSD that is not in any way, shape, or form invalidating people's experience of that. However, there is another way that is non-drug related, and why I'm different. And when there's thousands of coaches and practitioners out there, the number one thing that has me differentiate, not from a bigger, better, best perspective, but my concern is, if you're going to invest money to change, let's make sure it's sustainable. There is no other practitioner on the planet focusing on the sustainability element of personal and or professional transformation. I have an issue with somebody who goes and sees a counselor for 20 years, still dragging out their story. I have an issue with somebody who keeps going back and back and back to these courses that are designed to have you go back, because we need more viable people on the planet to be able to create the solutions to these new world problems that are occurring. So we can dance in and around any of that, my friend, but it kind of like as a short synopsis, that's been my journey to date.
So, Sally, I want to thank you for sharing your full story. I know that it is something that you want people to understand. It sets the context, because your life has been a trial by fire, and you have taken what you've learned and you are sharing the ability to shift with your clients. And that is absolutely fantastic. While we're talking about the leaders that you work with, because you truly do focus on the senior most leaders in business, in government, in sports, high performance athletes, you deal with the best of the best. That is your client base, that top 1%. And you are talking here today about that importance of healing at the executive level. And why is it so difficult there to address what I would consider fundamental human issues, right? We all have these challenges, but why is it so hard at the executive level?
Really good question. So pre-COVID, I used this particular model called the three-legged stool to explain to leaders the importance of healing, because there is not one executive environment in any organization globally that mandates or that encourages healing within their leadership development plans. And to me, that's a massive concern. We've got a lot of little boys, little girls running countries, economies, businesses. It's crazy. So first leg of the stool is traditional leadership, the masculine, hard skills. Most leaders are unconsciously competent in those skills. What do I mean by unconsciously competent? You're 15, you get in the car, it's all a bit clunky, you're unconsciously incompetent. You get in your car now, you don't even think about it, you're unconsciously competent. So most leaders are unconsciously competent in their traditional leadership skills. That leg of the stool is really, really solid. Second leg of the stool is subject matter expertise. Most leaders who've attained any level of authority or position are a subject matter expert in a cross-section of areas. They're unconsciously competent in that area. Third leg of the stool is more the so-called soft skills. Whoever termed them soft skills needs to be shot. Human skills, the belief, behavioral, cultural change, and the more non-traditional, non-linear aspect of leadership. Now, that leg of the stool is the most unstable, because when we've got the time, when we've got the budget, which is hardly ever, can you just come in and fix my people? Don't look at me, right? So it's only because of COVID, traditional leadership as we know it is dead. We will not be returning to what was. Most leaders are used to being in control, and they don't know how to navigate uncertainty. And so I'm just going to segue just quickly into some of the statistics, just for the linear listener that is out there. So this was a survey that was done to about 1,700 CEOs post-COVID on their experience. My concern with statistics is it's all very well to rattle off statistics, but what are we going to do about it? That's my concern at the moment. It is not being addressed because there's a massive stigmatization at the most senior level So how's this? 69% said it was the most challenging time of their career. These are CEOs. 69%. 32% said that they had to make most of their people redundant. 42% they had to do massive pay cuts. 72% said that they don't have the answers anymore, but they can't tell anybody. 52% were doubting their ability. 52%. 74% said that they had to just put on a brave face, but behind the scenes it was very different. 58% found it very challenging, obviously, because of the virtual environment. 56% said that it was dramatically impacting their mental health, but they had nobody to talk to. 32% said that they couldn't switch off. 42% said that they had higher stress levels, unprecedented than ever before. 25% said they elicited management consultants and or coaches for help. These are interesting. 69% said that they had to create closer relationships with their people, otherwise their people would walk. They had to become far more communicative, so that was an increase of 45%. 72% became kinder in their leadership style because they were forced to, and 74% had to introduce greater transparency. And that's my issue, is because we in our society do not endorse any human being to be vulnerable. It's viewed as a weakness. And so my concern, it's bad enough in the employee level that mental health is just kind of like given this kind of like compliance type listening as a generalization. But specifically at the most senior level, just something as basic as addiction. Addiction can also always be tracked back to childhood. The addiction level at the highest level at the moment is at its all-time high. Navigating the inner critic. The inner critic is one of the most destructive mechanisms within humankind. I'd like to see it in the schooling system as important as maths, mastery of the inner critic, so that people never hear that voice again as part of my education. Even if that was just introduced into the schooling system, it would change the human psyche as we know it. I've led my own 3-day leadership retreats for 10 months of the year for 10 years, and one of the key areas I focused on was the inner critic. Just tell me, what are your top 5 things that the inner critic says to you? Let's just share that with each other at C-suite level. And everybody's looking at each other. But when was the last time somebody walked up to you and said, how's your inner critic today? Everybody has an inner critic. Nobody's talking about it. And yet it's annihilating human potential. Just that in itself, when people talk about mental health, I love to bring simplicity to complexity. People can complicate the hell out of it. I'm interested in shifting people out of the quagmire of the bullshit that they've had to tolerate. Don't even get me started on the pharmaceutical companies, because we in our society, when somebody is feeling depressed, they go to their doctor, they immediately get put on depression drugs, versus thinking that that's their only option. So what I'm really committed to and passionate about is getting my education into the hands of those that can make a difference, because I have a 21-year tried and proven system that can shift anybody out of anything, regardless of how long it's been running, from a mental health standpoint, which is my passion to actually get it into the military, to be a replacement to this bullshit around PTSD, with no offense to your listeners.
All right. So in the statistics that you were sharing, and I'm not going to rattle off the specific numbers, but towards the end of the list, you were talking about the ones where the CEOs were actually doing things that I think you and I would consider better behavior, right? We're communicating more. We're being more transparent. We're building better relationships with their people. These are all really good things that they're doing under really high stress, as they've described it. In your practice, right, I have to imagine that you're wanting to lean into those positive experiences and move that inner critic. I mean, my inner critic is loud and she's brash, and when she's on a roll, it's hard to hear anything else. And I have to imagine that I'm not unique in the world. But if we start with the basics, right, start with me, the individual, and making me whole and healthy, that then what I can do as a leader for my team, my company, I am stepping exponentially into power. Yeah.
Yep. So, I've cracked the code on what hinders people being able to sustain change, regardless of how highly trained you are, because a lot of highly trained people still are not getting the edge, not getting the transformation that they want, and certainly don't know how to sustain it, which is where I come in. So I believe every single person, it's only my opinion, have what I call a default DNA identity. It's a bit like a fingerprint. It's a 2-hour process I walk people through. It's a game changer. regardless of how highly trained you are. All of the education that I impart is called awareness-based training. So think about organizations around the world. Every single organization has a human being in it. If we are to entertain that every single person has a default identity, a negative identity that they're unaware of, then there must be a default undercurrent in every single organization on the planet. So bringing awareness to this particular, so moment by moment by moment, we're either in our power or in our default, our disempowered state, and we oscillate between the two. At the moment in the world, there's education on how to manage your default, coordinate yourself around your default, master your default. But there's no education apart from mine that actually teach you to die to your default so that you're no longer oscillating. And then you can experience your new default being the empowered state all the time, which is where you can then experience equanimity, the ability to be the observer of what is versus how it could have been, should have been, wanted it to be. Example would be the death of my husband. I've done 40 years of healing. I'm highly trained. How on earth people go through an experience like that haven't been trained is beyond me, which segues nicely into I'm writing my third book, which is on empowered grief. The world currently is grieving. People have lost loved ones. People have lost retirement funds. People have lost future dreams. People have lost their businesses. People have lost, I could just rattle off the list. There is massive loss on the planet. We do not educate people on how to navigate grief. The indigenous cultures of the world are about the only people that actually respect the grieving process, especially in the face of death. So I believe the death of my husband has awakened within me that I am, people say to me, how can you obviously do what you do, when your husband's died? I go, no, I can still lead and I can still grieve, and I believe that the death of my husband has been a precipitator for me too. And he wouldn't want me to do anything other than celebrate, my life and impart the wisdom that I've spent an entire life crafting. To be able to stop people hurting permanently is a profound skill. And the ability, when somebody's been 30 years in depression and I can shift them in a 15-minute period in a group setting in a way that has it land like it's never landed. I love bringing simplicity to complexity, being able to impart skills. We don't have to spend a day to try and unearth your childhood and all the rest of it. There's some pretty traumatic processes that are out there that aren't serving the individual. So my passion is to be able to get this education in the hands of those that can make a difference for people to experience a more sustained equilibrium, to be able to be better contributors to our society, which is why I focus on the top level. If we have more functional CEOs, if we have more functional politicians, stop bagging the opposition and can you actually teach us about your policies? Can we get some succession planning in so we've got viable candidates to vote for? Celebrities, instead of going in and out of rehab, can you take responsibility for understanding your default identity and show up and actually be a contributor to society? Millionaires and billionaires, they're as dysfunctional as anybody else. If they had a conscience, again, generalization, half of the atrocities that occur in the world would not occur if they actually had a conscience on contributing to the societal dynamics that we have. They're as dysfunctional as people who don't have money. Terrified of spending it, terrified of losing it. If my money drops below 50 million, I'm naked to the world. There's dysfunction there. So I feel frustrated that I'm sitting on this education that I know is a threat to the pharmaceutical companies. I know that the character assassination was part of, people say you're a light worker. I'm actually a dark worker. I work with I'll actually teach people that whatever your perception is of light and your perception is of dark, there's only just what is without the meaning. All of human suffering is a function of what we make things mean. If you don't want to suffer anymore, that's a profound statement for those listening right now. All of human suffering is a function of what we make things mean. If you don't want to suffer, stop making things mean things. And that takes something.
And that's right. That's a really big point. And I want to pause for a second, right? We manifest it, right? We create our own destiny, right? By assigning our beliefs, our meanings to things, to situations, to money, to whatever, right? That is absolutely positively in our power to control. And we have been controlled in our thinking by the media, by other external forces on what is good, what is bad, what is valuable, what is not. And I'll make the brash statement from an American perspective, right? We're buying a lot of bull day in and day out. One topic you haven't thrown out there, the weight loss industry is a great one. That is that self-feeding monster of half truths or pure out fabrications that feeds a revenue model.
Oh,
Sally,
darling, you're going to get onto that subject. You go.
That one just lights me right up. While you're starting in repositioning the work that you're doing and how you're trying to influence not only change, but the sustaining of change, which for me, you're speaking my language, because change it only matters if you can sustain it and repeat it and keep it going. And that you and I we can stay in that one spot for hours together. When you're looking at the opportunity, right, you're looking into the future. What are the things that give you optimism and hope for us moving forward in making change and then sustaining it?
Usually adversity is the thing that shifts everything. At the moment, we cannot continue. Climate change is a really good example. And until we get present to the cost. So pre-COVID, society was very, very disassociated from dysfunction. And post-COVID, people were forced into looking at themselves. So I have it that a bit like 9/11, when 9/11 occurred, there was, it had a reverberated, whatever the word is, effect on people. So it's sad that it takes adversity to implement change. So in both of the books that I've written, I talk about a thing called culturalization. I believe that I have experienced a life of adversity to teach people that you don't need to create adversity to experience evolution of consciousness or that type of transformative change. At the moment, the only way really in our society, because the schooling system is trained to continue to keep status quo the way that it is, the powers that be within government, whilst we have certain systems, whilst the pharmaceutical companies do, that system keeps the dysfunction and the disassociation in place. Post-COVID is the first time that people have been waking up to actually maybe questioning the system, maybe questioning this or that or the other. I think that is gaining momentum. But, looking at the summit that was recently held for climate change is a really good example. You can have as many frigging summits as you like. You can bring in all the world leaders and do presentations at a massive cost as you like. But at the end of the day, there is a level of disassociation from us killing our planet, thinking and being so arrogant with that, to not making some pretty, mandatory, changes, because, every day we lose at this end, we're losing at the other end. And it's the same within the mental health side of things. Yes, am I a threat to the pharmaceutical companies? Yes, I am, because they are a money-making machine. This is a generalization. There's a lot of drugs out there. I'd say 80-20. 20% of any form of drug taking is warranted, valid, and needed. 80% is mindset, from my perspective. And we need to introduce different teachings such that people can believe that there could actually be another way. So an example would be this whole thing around the default identity. I would love to see it in the schooling system. It's a game changer with reference to, once you are aware, you're able to take your power back. People aren't present. They're either living in a past dynamic projection or in a future projection. So you're living past and future every day, hardly ever in the now moment. If you're not in the now moment, you can't connect into the unknown. Spirituality for me is about trusting the unknown dimension as much as the known. What could you accomplish if you trusted the unknown as much as the known? I gave up being a human being a long time ago, all too hard there. I use the word co-creation. It's the most palatable word to talk about faith without people going west on that conversation. To me, faith and love are the two most primary emotions for a human being. Very interesting that in every organization on the planet, we have human beings, and those two areas, faith and love, are devoid, taboo, not talked about. That is, to me, is just crazy. If there was a time to bring love and faith into the equation at every level of society, it is now, because we will not be able to survive as a race by any shape of the imagination if we can continue to keep doing what we've always done. That's just a fact.
Absolutely. And so in this mindset, right, it's all about, being disruptive with a targeted purpose. And yours is elevating people to be the best version of themselves that they can so that they are contributing at the highest levels possible. I end every conversation, Sally, asking, if I gave you a magic wand and this magic wand removes all constraints, what would be one thing that you would change in our world for healthcare, in our world for the betterment of people?
It may not just be one, it might be all coming into the thing. So I believe I'm here to play a part in systemic change where the most heinous crimes that are committed in our society, pedophilia, child trafficking, baby bashing, baby killing, the fact that that is occurring, all of that happens in silence. And if we as a society continue to tolerate that, I believe, because of the silencing of what occurred for me back when I was 15, the silencing of what occurred for me in the character assassination, I'm ramping up. There's a part that I have to play, I believe, in speaking directly into that world where we as a society can no longer accept that is something palatable. I'd love to see counselling and psychotherapy change. There comes a time where practices of old are no longer applicable in the future of where we're headed. And that is not discrediting the great counsellors and great psychotherapists and so forth that are out there. However, that system is broken, and that system needs to change. The kid statistics, our kids are dying. It's not okay. There's a level of disassociation in our society. Evolving the consciousness of those who lead. If I had a magic wand, there needs to be healing, understanding the power of healing, having that level of transparency within every single executive boardroom in the world, because we have human beings in it. And what comes with the human territory is dysfunction.
I had no doubt that your answer to that would be big. And I thank you for making an all-encompassing statement. And like so many of the things that you've talked about today, it comes back to, as the individual leader, us being whole and healthy and being able to then give and pour into those around us so that our organizations, our teams, our communities, our society at large can be whole and be healthy. Fabulous conversation, Sally. I don't know where the time goes. We could keep going forever, but I appreciate your unique perspective, your willingness to talk about challenging topics, things that are very much against the status quo. And I love trying to figure out how we can break everything and make an actual difference. Thank you for being with me today and sharing this conversation with our audience.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for being such a great disruptor yourself and providing a platform for people like myself to be able to communicate.
Absolutely, my pleasure. That wraps up another edition of Break Everything in Healthcare, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
You have just experienced Break Everything with Lisa L. Levy. Critical conversations on directed disruption that makes a difference.